Welcome to the second half of Animals in Poetry and Painting. Last week we looked at animals in the wild. Our focus today will be on the more intimate and day-to-day relationships of humans and the animals we live with, love, and often depend upon for food and fortune. So we'll start with some busy little lizards. Okay, we don't snuggle them like pets, but they're often in our gardens and on our walls. This, of course, is an MC Escher. This is an image I'm sure you're all familiar with, and it just warrants a close look because there's so much going on here. The lizards at one edge of the drawing emerge into three-dimensional reality, come to life, and appear to crawl over a series of symbolic objects. For example, a book on nature, right there, that big book, a geometer's triangle, a three-dimensional dodecahedron, a pewter bowl containing a box of matches and a box of cigarettes, and eventually they re-enter the drawing at the opposite edge. Other objects on the desk are a potted cactus and yucca, a ceramic flask with a cork stopper, and an open handwritten notebook of many pages. Although only the size of small lizards, these little guys look kind of fierce with their fangs, and you'll see the one in the upper there on the dodecahedron is blowing smoke, puff of billowing from its nostrils.
This is a poem by the great Federico Garcia Lorca, the Spanish poet who was killed for being a poet. He was assassinated by the Franco government when he was 33 years old in 1936. Mr. Lizard is Crying is the title. I'm not going to read the poem in Spanish, but I want you to know that in Spanish, lizard is lagartito or lagarto, the lizard, and crying is llorando. So it has a beautiful sound in Spanish, which we don't get in the English. Mr. Lizard is Crying. Mr. and Mrs. Lizard in little white aprons have gone and lost their wedding ring. Oh, their little leaden wedding ring. Oh, their little ring of lead. A large sky without people carries birds in its balloon. The sun, rotund captain, wears a satin waistcoat. Look how old they are, how old the lizards are. Oh, how they cry and cry. Oh, how they go on crying. So really you can see in this the use of the surrealism, how it affected the poetry at the very, very prosperous time for poetry in the country of Spain, the 30s.
Well, we've got two snake images here, and they have things in common, although they're painted centuries apart. This one by Fatima Ronquillo is a contemporary painting, and she was born in the Philippines and came to the United States as a very little girl with her parents. They settled in Texas. She now lives in Santa Fe. This is a milk snake. It's an actual kind of snake. And there's a story going on here, but it's curious and we're not sure what it is. Okay, we've got a hand, pearls, something what she has done is combine playful modern sensibility with old master techniques. Let's look at the next one, and then I'm going to go back to this for a sec. And let's see what they have in common. This one is Piero di Cosimo. So it's a Renaissance, Italian Renaissance painting. And what does it have in common with the other one? Well, there's female flesh. There are pearls. There's a snake. Is this snake threatening or is it just interesting? It wraps itself around her hand. The red of the snake and the dark green background are complementary colors, so there's a tension there set up by the colors used. So here's an Italian noblewoman who was married at 16 and was renowned for being the greatest Florentine beauty of her age. She died prematurely at the age of 23. The dark clouds and dead tree forewarn of her death. The symbolism of the snake is disputed. In late classical antiquity, the snake, especially biting its own tail, symbolized the cycle of life and hence rejuvenation. Her bare breasts, rather than being seen as erotic, indicate her youth and purity. And her hairstyle is that of a married woman, gathered up in braids and richly decorated with ribbons, beads, and pearls. So it's kind of fun to see these two together and how snakes are portrayed, not particularly as terrifying or threatening.
I want to comment on her forehead. This is something I learned in research I was doing on Piero della Francesca, that women pluck the hairs from the forehead, their foreheads, so that they would have a higher forehead. And I just think of all the things we do as women to appear beautiful. I'm glad, though I've worn shoes that have ruined my feet, I'm certainly glad I haven't plucked my forehead. This poem is called Summer. It's by the American poet, contemporary poet born in Compton, Robin Coast Lewis. Summer. Last summer, two discreet young snakes left their skin on my small porch 2 mornings in a row. Being postmodern now, I pretended I did not see them, nor understand what I knew to be circling inside me. Instead, every hour I told my son to stop with his incessant back chat. I peeled a banana and cursed God, his arrogance, his gall to still expect our devotion after creating love and mosquitoes. I showed my son the papery dead skin so he could know too what it feels like when something shows up at your door twice, telling you what you already know. To me, this poem harkens back to the Lucille Clifton we read about the fox.
So let's move on to fish here. This is the same artist, Utagawa Kuniyoshi, that did the Jabberwocky image of the dragon. So he's an Edo artist. He painted these carp, they're woodblock prints in the ukiyo-e style. Note the leg of the octopus dangling down. What's really striking about this particular image is the colors, right? I mean, it's the complementary blue and orange that just pop with each other. And again, there is some calligraphy there, or yeah, calligraphy on the right-hand side. And I know some of you know Belle Yang. She's a friend of mine, and I asked her after the question last week about whether or not the calligraphy usually refers directly to the image. And her answer was very, very Chinese. She said, the best image ideograph combinations are those that augment one another, not explaining, but adding, so that 2 + 2 equals more than 4, which I thought was a lovely way of describing the relationship between the calligraphy and the image themselves.
This is by Elizabeth Bishop, the great American poet, born in 1911 and died in 1979. She taught at Harvard, and there's a beautiful book out by Dana Gioia. He was her student. He's a contemporary American poet. I caught a tremendous fish and held him beside the boat, half out of water, with my hook fast in a corner of his mouth. He didn't fight. He hadn't fought at all. He hung a grunting weight, battered and venerable and homely. Here and there, his brown skin hung in strips like ancient wallpaper, and its pattern of darker brown was like wallpaper. Shapes like full-blown roses, stained and lost to age. He was speckled with barnacles, fine rosettes of lime and infested with tiny white sea lice. And underneath 2 or 3 rags of green weed hung down. While his gills were breathing in the terrible oxygen, the frightening gills, fresh and crisp with blood that can cut so badly, I thought of the coarse white flesh packed in like feathers, the big bones and the little bones, the dramatic reds and blacks of his shiny entrails, and the pink swim bladder like a big peony. I looked into his eyes, which were far larger than mine, but shallower and yellowed. The irises backed and packed with tarnished tinfoil, seen through the lens of old scratched isinglass. They shifted a little, but did not return my stare. It was more like the tipping of an object toward the light. I admired his sullen face, the mechanism of his jaw, and then I saw that from his lower lip, you could call it a lip, grim, wet, and weapon-like, hung 5 old pieces of fish line, or 4, and a wire leader with a swivel still attached, with all their 5 big hooks grown firmly in his mouth. A green line frayed at the end where he broke it, 2 heavier lines, and a fine black thread still crimped from the strain and snap when it broke and he got away. Like metals with their ribbons frayed and wavering, a 5-haired beard of wisdom trailing from his aching jaw. I stared, and victory filled up the little rented boat from the pool of bilge where oil had spread a rainbow around the rusted engine to the baler rusted orange, the sun-cracked thwarts, the oar locks on their strings, the gunnels, until everything was rainbow, 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 and I let the fish go.
Thank you, Patrice.
Elizabeth Bishop is known for having not written a huge number of poems during her lifetime. When you hear this, and later when you get it in an email, she worked so hard. Her description was so precise, and she spends a lot of time writing her poetry, her individual poems.
So Paul Klee was inspired to write this from the tale of 1001 Nights, Sinbad the Sailor. In the story, Sinbad is marooned or shipwrecked after he sets sail from Basra, which is modern day Iraq, with merchandise. He's able to survive the terrible dangers he encounters by a combination of resourcefulness and luck, and returns home with a fortune. By using abstraction, Klee takes a battle scene is imagined to be terrifying and adds a playfulness to it. These crazy little fish. Your poem, Patrice, goes really nicely with the next couple of images too. This one by Winslow Homer, The Herring Nets, 1885 at the Art Institute of Chicago. Let's just look at this for a minute. The weather is threatening. Where are we, the viewer? We're right near that barrel or that thing that's bobbing in the water. So we're down almost below, it's kind of where the fish are being pulled in. And there's a sense of the ocean being very unsettled and threatening. Way off in the distance is the mothership, the boat that we have disembarked from. Homer depicted heroic efforts of fishermen at their daily work, hauling in an abundant catch of herring in their small dory. Using teamwork for survival, both strive to steady the precarious boat as it rides the incoming swells. And it reminded me immediately of this poem, this painting by Armin Hansen, where you have a similar perspective of we're down below and looking up at these fishermen who are hauling in nets. Similarly, Armin Hansen depicted rugged men trawling off the California coast. Hansen himself had worked on trawlers in the North Sea, so he had firsthand experience of what it was to be out in the weather and in formidable conditions, dressed in their foul weather gear and positioned in various modes of action. Hansen implies not only movement, but also really hard labor. His colors are cool with muted shades of blues, reds, and violets, highlighted with a kind of an acid yellow. We're gonna move on now to one of the oldest relationships of man with domesticated animals, and that's the horse. So we have a couple of cave paintings here from Lascaux. And again, like the cave paintings we saw last week, I mean, it's so interesting, isn't it? That just deep in these dark caves with you know, just ground pigments and that were suspended in different oil or urine or water or whatever, you know, the artist was working with, blood sometimes, they could create these very interesting, realistic and dramatic, you know, action-packed images of animals and people. So let's see. Deborah Butterfield, her work focuses almost exclusively on horses. They're kind of an alter ego for her and their various expressive moods. So each of these horses on its own is an interesting assemblage of found objects, but putting them together, there's quite a dialogue going on here. And let's see, Patrice, I think you've got a lovely poem.
This is by the American poet James Wright, 1927 to 1980. A blessing. Just off the highway to Rochester, Minnesota, twilight bound softly forth on the grass, and the eyes of those two Indian ponies darken with kindness. They have come gladly out of the willows to welcome my friend and me, to step over the barbed wire into the pasture where they have been grazing all day alone. They ripple tensely. They can hardly contain their happiness that we have come. They bow shyly as wet swans. They love each other. There is no loneliness like theirs. At home once more, they begin munching the young tufts of spring in the darkness. I would like to hold the slenderer one in my arms, for she has walked over to me and nuzzled my hand. She is black and white, the mane falls wild on her forehead, and a light breeze moves me to caress her long ear that is delicate as the skin over a girl's waist. Suddenly, I realized that if I stepped out of my body, I would break into blossom. That ending there is so incredibly expansive as you see this intimacy that James Wright experiences with his friend and these two horses, and that it just gives him such a sense of ecstasy. And of course, this sounds to me, I don't know what year he wrote it, but it certainly sounds like a poem written by a young man, not an older man. The level of sexuality in it is so striking. This is from the great D.H. Lawrence, 1885 to 1930, very short poem called The White Horse. The youth walks up to the white horse to put its halter on, and the horse looks at him in silence. They are so silent, they are in another world. And you can kind of see at the end of this poem has a quality similar to the ending of the James Wright poem, that there's something that the poem always wants to, much like Bell Yang's description of the relationship between the image and calligraphy, a good poem always wants to take 2 + 2 and equal more than 4. And you really can see that in these two poems.
One thing that's interesting to me about this image is the boy is leading the horse by the force of the suggestion of his wrist. There's no bridle or anything there, or no reins. Yeah. So let's see. Oh boy. Uchello, the Battle of San Romano, High Renaissance. First of all, this image looks like pickup sticks, doesn't it? I mean, there's lances everywhere. And the perspective is interesting. In the background are the Italian hills with hounds and rabbits running hither and thither and leaping all over the place, and tiny little figures way in the background. So there's some definite effort at perspective here. But what amuses me so much about this is Paolo Uchello is depicting the Battle of San Romano, and he's demonstrating, or actually showing off, the fact that he can paint horses from every angle: lying down, facing us, sideways, kicking, standing, rear first, head first. I mean, they're just every possible angle that you could paint a horse.
I'd like to read another one for this, which is called She Had Some Horses. It's a very long poem. I'm going to read you just a short excerpt of it by Joy Harjo, born in 1951. She's our current US Poet Laureate, only the second poet to serve 3 terms. She has a new memoir out called Poet Warrior. Joy Harjo is a member of the Muskogee Nation. From She Had Some Horses. She had some horses. She had some horses who were bodies of sand. She had some horses who were maps drawn of blood. She had horses who were skins of ocean water. She had horses who were blue air of sky. She had horses who were fur and teeth. She had horses who were clay and would break. She had horses who were splintered red cliff. She had some horses. She had horses with eyes of trains. She had horses with full brown thighs. She had horses who laughed too much. She had horses who threw rocks at glass houses. She had horses who licked razor blades. She had some horses. And that's just a very small excerpt of a much longer poem. Notice in this poem the incredible power of repetition. And it's something we also see in the art here that we're looking at, the power of repetition and repetition vary.
And this is one that Patrice and I just added at the last minute, but it's just so wonderful because there is a poem specifically about this. Marc Chagall, L'Equestrienne, his 1938 image. Look at the horse holding a violin under its chin and a little bouquet of flowers, a nosegay in its mouth. And if you look carefully in the upper left and the lower right, there are little violin players there also. But the main thing is this crazy, what is going on here? I mean, Chagall often leaves us wondering, like his painting of the birthday wish. What's going on? Are they real? Is it imagined? So go ahead, Patrice.
And why isn't her dress covering up her breasts? I look at that and he's got these long sleeves on and I just think, oh, I feel cold when I look at it. Maybe she's a fortune teller. I don't know. Don't Let That Horse by Lawrence Ferlinghetti. This was written in 1958. And he just, former owner of City Lights Books in San Francisco, he just died last year at the age of 100. Don't let that horse eat that violin, cried Chagall's mother. But he kept right on painting and became famous and kept on painting the horse with violin in mouth. And when he finally finished it, he jumped upon the horse and rode away, waving the violin. And then with a low bow, gave it to the first naked nude he ran across, and there were no strings attached. Ha!
I love that. I think these are our last 2 horses. Franz Mark did a number of horse compositions. Here's his 1910 Horse in a Landscape. And you know, as you look at this, okay, imagine an artist sets up an easel and puts an empty canvas on it, whether he's in his studio or out on location, and he decides he's going to paint a horse with fields in the background. Okay, it's just intriguing to me that he would paint a horse from this particular angle over the horse's shoulder. You don't see the horse's face. His body or her body is cut off. The blue mane and tail are complementary colors to this sort of rust color body. And in fact, the color of the body of the horse, if you mix the green and the red and the yellow of the rest of the palette, you'd get that color. So it's just intriguing to me, sort of what an artist comes up with. This, of course, is the beginnings of modernism. And so he's doing something that's unconventional. And then Kandinsky, a year later, up here in the right-hand corner, that's all about speed, all about motion, speed, and just taking out all the elements except the sense that that horse is moving quickly and there's a man holding on. Looks like a jockey, doesn't he?
I want to recommend a children's book to you called The Artist Who Painted a Blue Horse. It's about Franz Mark, and it was written by Eric Carle, and it's about Franz Mark. I think you might enjoy it.
On to pets, dogs and cats, etc. And I just put this image in because I started to think about royal families and their pets, and how pets had such a prominent place in the family. So you've got portraits of the children of Charles I by Van Dyck over here on the left, and note the Persian carpets, the velvet curtains pulled back. I mean, everything about it is very elegant. The little spaniels, and then the huge mastiff, and then Queen Victoria's favorite pets, painted in 1838. Again, these pets are definitely royal. Look at the fabrics, and the spaniel Dash is seated there on a velvet settee of some kind. Laurie the parrot, the greyhound Nero, and deerhound Hector. You know, it just speaks to how valued these animals were by Queen Victoria. Also, here's another one that I wanted to include it because this little dog in the foreground here just takes front and center, and kind of takes the wind out of the rest of the painting. He's so important to the composition. This is from a miniature, a Flemish artist, and this particular image is called The Author in His Studio. So this is the guy that wrote the book about a famous knight in armor, and it's from an illustrated manuscript detailing a knight's life. But in the background, you'll see a peacock in the courtyard, a man with a horse, and then up on that little hitching post is a little monkey dressed as a kind of a monk. So that's what that detail is. I just found this image intriguing on all sorts of levels, the realism of it, the composition of being in an interior and looking out through the courtyard. It epitomizes the Dutch fascination with absolute realism, and also very precise perspective. But the dog is just right there in the middle, looking cute as the dickens.
This is by the Polish poet Anna Sweer, 1909 to 1984, active in the resistance during World War II. And this poem, when I first read this poem, I thought, why has this poem never been written before? Or why did I not? It's just so obvious, but yet not. It's called Happy as a Dog's Tail. Happy as something unimportant, and free as a thing unimportant. and something no one prizes, and which does not prize itself, and something mocked by all, and which mocks at their mockery, as laughter without serious reason, as a yell able to out-yell itself, happy as no matter what, as any no matter what, happy as a dog's tail. And notice she does something interesting here. She makes the title happy as a dog's tail, because that gives context for the poem. Otherwise, we would be really wondering. And then she repeats that at the end of the poem. And all the while, I can see that dog's tail swishing back and forth.
David Gilhooley loved his dog Spot, and he painted him in lots of different situations and with different patterns and all. So here's one more. He was, I'm sure some of you are familiar with him. He was a California ceramicist, sculptor, painter, printmaker, and professor. He's best known for pioneering the funk art movement. And lots of his sculptures have little frogs in them. He uses frogs kind of the way Banksy has rats throughout so much of his art. And just coincidentally, the Monterey Museum of Art, literally yesterday, the Board of Trustees voted to accession 4 or 5 of Gilhooley's ceramic pieces. They were a gift to the museum, so we're very excited about that. Ruffino Tamayo, what about these dogs? Now, those are a little different than my dog Spot. These dogs are threatening, they're growling, they're howling, they've got sharp teeth. Tamayo is a Mexican artist that uses that Mexican muralist style of very simplified forms and strong expressive gestures.
This is a poem from an anthology of chants and incantations from Latin America, and written by a poet named Munda Tostón, called Good Dog. Take your tortilla. When I die, you will carry me across the water to Kattenbach.
Do we know what Kattenbach means?
No, it's a place. But I think it means the equivalent of heaven, but I don't know exactly where it is. And I could find nothing about this poet when I looked for information.
There are 6 individuals here, each one very different from the other and all kind of lost in their own little worlds of looking in different directions and different poses, and incredible realism. We're out in a barn here. You can see the antlers and what is that, a powder horn? And the straw on the floor indicates that these are working dogs rather than house pets. But when I found this image, I thought, oh, golly, gotta throw this one in. You can pick out each strand of straw there on the floor. The handling of light is just so effective. And also the handling of the negative space, the empty upper left-hand quadrant of the painting is a nice contrast to the busyness of the animals just having their own energy and kind of moving off in different directions. Love that stuff up on the shelf too. Okay, moving on to cats. So we've got an Egyptian cat in the Louvre and Bart Vanderlecht's cat from 1914. He was a Dutch painter, designer, and ceramicist, and helped to found the De Stijl movement. But let's see, I think, Patrice, you've got some cat stuff here.
Mm-hmm. Here's a very famous, maybe the most famous cat poem, or one of them. I'm going to read just an excerpt from Christopher Smart's Jubilante Año. For I will consider my cat Geoffrey, for he is the servant of the living God, duly and daily serving him. For at the first glance of the glory of God in the east, he worships in his way. For is done by wreathing his body 7 times round with elegant quickness. For then he leaps up to catch the musk, which is the blessing of God upon his prayer. For he rolls upon prank to work it in. For having done duty and received blessing, he begins to consider himself. For this he performs in 10 degrees. First, he looks upon his forepaws to see if they are clean. For secondly, he kicks up behind to clear away there. For thirdly, he works it upon stretch with 4 paws extended. For fourthly, he sharpens his paws by wood. For fifthly, he washes himself. For sixthly, he rolls upon wash. For seventhly, he flees himself, that he may not be interrupted upon the beat. For eighthly, he rubs himself against a post. For ninthly, he looks up for instructions. For tenthly, he goes in quest of food. And you can see my cat Ace over my shoulder there, sitting on her heating pad. And this is, if you have cats, you know this is very, very accurate to the behavior of cats. Christopher Smart was from England. He was born in 1722 and died in 1771.
That's great. That's a wonderful poem. The image on the right, of course, is done by Franz Mark, who did the horse that we saw a minute ago. But I thought it was fun to see these two white cats similar in size in terms of their, in terms of the composition and shape. So by very different artists. So Julie Monet was born in Paris. She was the daughter and only child of artist Bert Morisot, the Impressionist, and Eugène Manet, the younger brother of Edward Manet. Both of her parents died within a 3-year period, leaving her orphaned at the age of 16. Throughout her life, Julie posed frequently for her mother and other Impressionist artists, including Renoir and her uncle Edouard Manet. So this is a typical Renoir Impressionist painting on several levels. The Impressionists, as you know, loved wallpaper and patterns and fabric. They also were very interested in representing the color white with all its variations. So you see lots of white dresses and white tablecloths and backgrounds in Impressionist work. But this is a delightful, goodness, don't you just feel that little kitty cat, the way it's snuggled up in her lap there and her hands wrapped around it. A very limited palette here to show a lot of expression. And then, oh, Inagaki's stretching cat. Look at that little pussy cat down in the middle, but in the distance, in the background. And then this cat just stretching and the movement of the gesture. We've all seen cats do this, and their whole body seems to just come alive with that stretch, that motion.
I have a poem. It doesn't exactly go with this, but kind of. It's by the great American poet William Carlos Williams, who was a family doctor. He was born in 1883 and died in 1963. Poem. As the cat climbed over the top of the jam closet, first the right forefoot carefully, then the hind stepped down into the round of the empty flower pot. And that careful description of it's almost like a painting, isn't it? The way that Williams describes the movement of the cat.
And finally, we've got a Pablo Picasso, cat catching a bird, the violence, the gore, the death, very expressive. As Picasso is so good at, he can accomplish so much with so little. And then Suzanne Valadon, who was the illegitimate child of a French laundress who made ends meet by posing as an artist model for such painters as Toulouse-Lautrec, Renoir, who and many others whose methods she studied, eventually becoming a painter herself. So this is her favorite cat. And I love the fabric and the way the cat kind of blends into the colors on the background and the movement of the fabric. So Trombley's version of this old art historical theme, Lila and the Swan, supplies no contrasts of feathers and flesh, but an orgiastic fusion and confusion of energies within furiously thrashing overlays of crayon, pencil, and ruddy paint. A few recognizable signs, hearts, a phallus, fly out from this explosion. So Patrice chose this painting as well as the poem. So thank you, Patrice.
Well, it's an interesting, story, right? Lila and the Swan. So the myth is that Lila was the Greek myth, the queen of Sparta. She's the mother of Helen, who sparked the Trojan War. And Zeus took the form of a swan and either seduced or raped her, apparently on the same night she'd had sex with her husband. I don't know why that detail is all that important, but it certainly shows up. I could find no poem written about this myth by a woman poet. I could only find poems by men. One called Lila by Rainer Maria Rilke, and you'll remember last week I read the Panther poem, and another very famous poem, Lila and the Swan, by William Butler Yeats. And it's always interesting to me in literature and art how male artists romanticize rape. And I think that it's very disturbing to me. Even this painting is very disturbing to me. You see the woman's face there. It's this real confusion of action going on. But I'm going to read you one called Lila After the Swan by Carl Phillips, poet born in 1959. And I'm going to write a Lila and the Swan poem. And so that we have a woman, a poet writing, or maybe I'm going to write an essay about this whole idea. This is called Lila After the Swan. Perhaps in the exaggerated grace of his weight settling, the wings raised, held in strike or embrace position, I recognize something more than swan, I can't say. There was just this barely defined shoulder whose feathers came away in my hands and the bit of world left beyond it coming down to the crippled field. Ravens, the precise color of sorrow and good light, neither black nor blue like fallen stitches upon it. And the hour forever, it seemed, half stepping its way elsewhere. Then everything, I remember, began happening more quickly. So I love how Carl Phillips writes from Lila's point of view in this poem, rather than observing the story from the outside. But when I send you the poems, I will send you all three. Okay, Lila.
Okay, thanks. So let's look at some barnyard kind of animals. Ducks here. This is Mary Cassatt feeding the ducks at the Metropolitan. It's Dry Point and Aquatint. You can see the influence that Asian artists had on Mary Cassatt. In fact, you know, the woodblock prints were just flooding Parisian curio shops and galleries and stores around the last decades of the 19th century. So Monet and Renoir and Degas and Mary Cassatt and so many of the artists were really taken with the Japan, especially to let's see, Utamaro Hiroshige, Hokusai. Anyway, the main Edo woodblock printers had a tremendous influence on the Impressionist painters. And you can see that these three figures, it looks like three generations of women, and their clothing and even their hairstyles and their faces look somewhat Asian, but more than that, it's the flatness of the image that is so typical of a Japanese woodblock print. These are great. Here are two duck pond paintings. Claude Monet and Pierre Auguste Renoir often went out on location and painted together. And there's numerous examples of them setting up their easels near each other. And it's such fun to see how differently and similarly they paint the exact same scene. But it's just a quiet pastoral little afternoon scene of autumn and ducks on a pond. And the orange and red colors of the roof definitely contrast with the cool colors of the autumn, the water, the sky, and the leaves. More barnyard paintings. Edgar Hunt was a British painter known for his wildly popular bucolic scenes of domestic livestock. He was devoted to animals and had originally planned to become a farmer before experiencing success as a painter.
The second poem by William Carlos Williams, very famous poem, The Red Wheelbarrow. So much depends upon a red wheelbarrow glazed with rainwater beside the white chickens. I'll give it to you one more time, such a short poem. The Red Wheelbarrow. So much depends upon a red wheelbarrow glazed with rainwater beside the white chickens. And this poem was read by some university students, and they were asked to analyze the poem. So they wrote to Williams to ask if they had analyzed the poem correctly by saying that it was about a woman on her period. And Williams wrote back and said, the poem is about the rain, the chickens, and the red wheelbarrow, period.
That's great. Well, the poem sounds like a painting, doesn't it?
It does sound like a painting.
Okay, Old Spot. All I could find out about this painting, other than I love it, is that it was said to be the largest pig ever bred in Britain. The artist John Miles was self-taught, so he was a naive or primitive artist, as we label them. And I think you've got a poem about a pig.
I do, and this is one of my most favorite poems ever. Though if you spend any time with me at all, you have to watch out because I say that frequently. But this really is one of my favorite poems. It was written by the great American poet, born in 1927, died in 2014, Galway Kinnell. And I'm so happy that I had more than one opportunity to hear him read this poem aloud. I wish I could read it like he did. It's called St. Francis and the Sow. The bud stands for all things, even for those things that don't flower. For everything flowers from within, of self-blessing, though sometimes it is necessary to reteach a thing its loveliness, to put a hand on its brow of the flower and retell it in words and touch. It is lovely, until it flowers again from within of self-blessing. As St. Francis put his hand on the creased forehead of the sow and told her in words and in touch blessings of earth on the sow. And the sow began remembering all down her thick length from earthen snout all the way through the fodder and slops to the spiritual curl of the tail, from the hard spininess spiked out from the spine down through the great broken heart to the sheer blue milken dreaminess spurting and shuddering from 14 teats into the 14 mouths sucking and blowing beneath them, the long perfect loveliness of Sal. At the beginning of this poem, he says, the bud stands for all things, for even those that don't flower, for everything flowers from within of self-blessing. I don't know, that just undoes me.
Look at those tiny little legs. Oh
I
my
know.
goodness. Oh. I went to the Fry Art Museum a month or so ago, just after Patrice and I had decided to, well, no, it was a little longer than that. Anyway, we decided to do this class together, and their whole exhibition was working animals from the collection of Charles and Emma Fry. And I just thought, wow, I mean, this is a fantasy. So I went and looked at the exhibition, of course, and took a bunch of images from it. So we're going to just look at a few of their collection. But this was written up as a wall panel. We domesticate and train animals to serve our needs. Dogs herd sheep and cattle, oxen pull heavy carts, horses draw carriages, cows produce milk, sheep provide wool, chickens lay eggs. These animals work during their lives and then with death provide meat and leather. The Fry fortune, the source of the Fry Museum, resulted from the Fry family meatpacking business. So there's a tension between the somewhat idyllic, harmonious farmyard scenes that we're going to look at and the production of mutton, beef, ham, bacon, tallow, leather, and lard. And this next image is just priceless, I think. It's Fry's Barf Beef. Barf. I mean, it's just Barf Beef with gravy, pressure cooked, seasoned, ready to serve. So this is a label from their slaughterhouse and packing plant. And then we have all of these lovely pastoral late 19th century images. Paintings of animals became especially popular during the 19th and early 20th centuries when spreading industrialization and population shifts from rural to urban settings reduced opportunities for close contact with animals. People increasingly engaged with animals in mediated ways by means of images. Most of these are paintings by French artists, Peasant Girl with Cattle. And what's she doing there? Can you see? She's knitting as she's walking. So she's got the yarn in her apron and she's walking along, tending her cattle, tending her cows, her dairy cows probably. A very pastoral scene, a gray overcast sky. The sky takes up about half of the composition, which we're going to see again. It looks like water in the background and then walking through a meadow. The cow on our left is noticing us. So Monet is inviting us into this painting, although the young woman is completely oblivious to our presence. The cow seems to know we're there. Same here. Look at the way this is set up. This is another French artist, Barriot, and painted about the same time, 3 cows and a calf. Here the artist depicts the cows as sentient beings aware of each other and their surroundings, including both the shepherd and the sheep in the distance and us, the viewer. So the mother cow is looking back over there at the sheep. Her calf is looking at us and acknowledging our presence. Again, the sky, it's hard to believe these are 2 different artists, but obviously there is a convention going on here of an overcast sky and the division of the canvas into 2 halves, the sky and the and the grass, and then the water in the background. We've got some goats here, similar stuff. We've got a young man in his lederhosen. This is a German artist. The shepherd back there looking towards us, as are a couple of the goats. And just, such lovely pastoral scenes of happy little animals and happy little shepherds. Just people loved collecting this whole genre for their homes. This is an intriguing painting. It's an English painting, and it's called Dipping Sheep, the big sky there, the low horizon line. I wonder if any of you know about dipping sheep. I certainly didn't. This is the same decade as the others were painted, but here's the story. To combat parasites that can severely damage the health of their flocks, farmers bathe their sheep in chemicals with insecticides. They'd then be rinsed in streams and ponds. That's sort of horrifying to our modern sensibilities. This improved the animal's ability to provide wool and meat, but the environmental damage was enormous. The practice was finally prohibited. So that's just a detail of this other image, as you can see. But I just got a real kick out of the Fry collection of late 19th century farm animals, all sort of in contrast to the way they made their money. And finally, a German painting. This is, I brought this image and included it because I think it's such an interesting perspective on this grouping. It's called Four in Hand, which is, the four horses, the guy walking along with a lantern, but we're looking at everything from the back. It's kind of like the Franz Mark horse. The dog is from the back, the man is from the back, the horses are all from the back. There's a farmhouse or something off in the upper left corner. It's a wet, damp evening. It looks kind of chilly, and I don't know, what's the feeling? It's very emotional. Is it cozy? Is it, are we on our way home? Do we have a long way to go? The way the light is cast on the puddles and on the haunches of the horse there on nearest to us just creates an interesting kind of composition. And finally, we're wrapping up here with a couple of photographs. This is a photo of a Mandari Herder by a photographer from South Sudan. And I just was intrigued by it. I think it's such an interesting and artistic photograph of this young man, again, a shepherd of some kind with his cattle. And the motion of the horns interweaving with each other, and his staff, and the very muted color palette of the photo, I think also is just interesting and lovely. Belinda with Rosita from Argentina, again, a photograph that I thought was very artistic. And Patrice, I know you found this interesting, and I think you've got a poem to go with it.
This is by the Nobel Prize winning poet Thomas Transtromer, 1931 to 2015. It's from a longer poem called March 1970. Tired of all who come with words but no language, I went to the snow-covered island. The wild does not have words. The unwritten pages spread themselves out in all directions. I come across the marks of road deer's hooves in the snow. Language, but no words.
And then we started last week with a Noah's Ark image. So we'll wrap up with a Noah's Ark image by Jacob Savory, 16th century Dutch. This is the animals being led onto the ark. You've got a Dutch little village there in the background to the right, and thousands of birds fluttering around in the sky, just portending that there's something very ominous about to happen. The animals are delightful here. Some of them look kind of real, but look at that neck protruding out from the right of the composition. Is that some kind of camel neck or something? And then a funny rhinoceros right behind, these crazy little piglet things in the front. Parrot, a peacock up on the perch there to the left. And there are a lot of people in this image, which is interesting. And also the structure of the ark is interesting.
This is an American Indian poem from the Teton Sioux people, very, very old piece. I sing for the animals. Out of the earth, I sing for them. I sing for them. Out of the earth, I sing for them. The animals, I sing for them. For many years, I have taught poetry to children in the schools. And one of the poems that I've recited to them for a long time is a poem that comes from the country of Gabon in Africa. The poem is, I'm going to recite just a very tiny portion of it. The poem is called All Lives, All Dances, and All is Loud. The fish goes, hip! The bird goes, zzz. The ratoncito goes, gna. I throw myself to the left. I throw myself to the right. I act the fish, which darts in the water, which darts, which twists about, which leaps. All lives, all dances, and all is loud. Now, when I do that for children, I'm really, really loud. But I didn't want to hurt you or my cat's eardrums. So we'll save the loudness for a day we have a chance to learn the poem together in person.